This is TWiT.
Will there be an Apple TV in the next few weeks before the end of the month? Rene, what do you think?
I hope so. Yeah, I think it's highly likely. I mean, apparently it was ready last year and they didn't push it out for a variety of reasons. But I'm mostly curious if they go for the timid upgrade, because there's been two rumored versions of it. One is a timid upgrade that would go to an A12X that would let it do better HDR compositing and play Apple Arcade games.
And the other rumor, Apple TV. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think that one is the conservative Apple TV. That's more of the Apple TV, like the TV watching. Apple Arcade sort of.
It's not super demanding.
What's the right word? Yeah, not super demanding at all. The other rumor is that Apple's going to go to an A14X, which would raise the price, which I think is a huge concern because Apple's tried doing higher-end Apple TVs internally before, and people were worried that they were too expensive. But any Apple TV is too expensive now. So I would rather Apple either make like a little dongle, like a Fire Stick or a Chromecast stick for people for whom they want to have a low price point, and then make a box that is really interesting, that is an A14X. There's been rumors they're talking to game studios about doing a lot more game support, about maybe bundling in an Apple-designed controller even, and then use it as like that staging device for the VR headsets in the future where they really go into high-quality gaming, high-quality entertainment, education, fitness, that sort of stuff.
And I'm really interested to watch the trend of 120 hertz. So, where there's rumors that the phone this fall will be at 120 frame, or the display will be at 120 hertz.
That's
and
the
if you
refresh
start
on the screen.
Yeah, but it's 120 frames per second, right? So we're mostly looking at 30 frames a second in streaming, 60 frames per second for gaming. But what if you have a gaming console and a video console and the phones all able to work at 120 frames a second? Now, so far that hasn't been super successful for folks because people just aren't used to looking at that. And people say, "Oh, that just looks like TV," like when you're watching a film. But the issue is that it's the way that the TV converts 24 frames a second to 120 that really is the problem. Right now, we could shoot 120, but we can't display it anywhere. So with Apple, with what they own right now, I think what's really the spaces that they could affect if they wanted to, and I don't know if Apple's going to do this at all, but if you have a 120 frame per second capable device to put it out to the TV, if you have cameras on the phones and the iPads that are able to capture at 120 frames per second, and if you started generating content, and I would not say film content, but let's say if you look at the nature content that Apple does, which is that's the best part of Apple TV Plus, in my opinion, is their nature stuff has just been outstanding. If you can imagine a device able to do 4K or even 8K at 120 frames a second, it may not be this version, but if you go down that path, you start creating something that almost nobody else can create. they just, and I think that's where we're going to keep on seeing Apple go down that path where, we're going to make everybody play games that only we play well.
I feel like there's warring factions over Apple TV inside Apple. That there's the just a hobby group that doesn't want to do too much, doesn't want to make it too expensive. They look at Roku; it's less than half an Apple TV, and it's the best seller. And they go, that's where we should be going. We should be going with a low-end consumer product that's wider spread, and especially given Apple's now devotion to services, you want to get Apple TV and Plus in more hands and Arcade in more hands and so forth. And then I figure there is a group, probably genetically related to Alex Lindsay, who are saying, just think what we could do with this set-top box if it were $500. And I think there's a group of Apple fans who would pay $500 for a TV box that did all those amazing things.
I actually think that the biggest challenge to all of that is that Apple has made the AirPlay and other things available on TVs.
Apple TV is available on TVs now,
and that's actually if anything else that's
actually
the low end. Kind of. Well, the problem is it holds them back because now you have backwards compatibility issues. But you could get to a point where, and this would drive the TV manufacturers crazy, is you can get 30 or 60 frames a second on those TVs, but if it knows that you have 120 frames a second, or if it knows those things, it'll just
maybe
give
you
it
make
to you
an Apple TV Pro or something like that is a different.
Well, I think that was their answer to the Apple TV stick. Like instead of making an Apple TV stick, which I still wish they'd make because I want to travel with one, they just put the app. They made the app ubiquitous, and maybe they'll do more of that. But the answer to the top end, I don't know if it's still the same, but the rumor was previously, like, there was a 3 years in the desert where there was no new Apple TV hardware before the future of apps are apps. So the future of TV is apps when we got the new Apple TV 4 before the 4K. And supposedly Eddie was really interested in it, but there was a layer of middle management that just couldn't come to terms with it. Like, they figured out, we're going to try the DVR box. No, we're going to try a high-end gaming console. No, we're going to try a low-end thing. And they just kept not doing what he asked for them to do. And it took cycles and cycles to figure out what was wrong and fix it. And finally, they went with what all of us just wanted, and that was like a version of iOS that ran on the TV and let us use all sorts of apps. And they still managed to screw that up by forcing the Siri controller and on-demand resources to all the developers who were going to make apps for them anyway. So I think that was just a huge missed opportunity, and it's unclear if they'll recapture it. But we just saw Microsoft clear the Bethesda transaction today, and Microsoft and Sony are buying up a lot of the game franchises and collateral and everything out there. And if the other rumor is true that Apple is going to get into either like amping up Apple Arcade games, getting Apple Arcade games to the AAA level, or investing in studios of their own or properties of their own, then I think that they start to justify that hardware. I don't think they can compete with an Xbox or a PlayStation, even with an A14X. I think it does different things than the AMD SoCs that are in those next generation consoles, but I think it'll start to get them there, especially as they go into more premium entertainment and gaming.
Actually, I guess the high-end competition really is the Nvidia Shield, which I have and love, and it's like $300, so it's right kind of in the middle there.
Or just an Xbox and a PlayStation 5. I mean,
well, that's the next step up. Absolutely, yeah. If you have an Xbox and you've got a UHD DVD player in it, you've got
with an Apple TV app on it.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Alex, have you ever tried the Nvidia Shield?
I haven't tried it.
Yeah, I'm curious what you would think about it. Dolby Vision, Atmos, but it also does what they call AI upscaling to 4K, which actually is kind of interesting. It does a pretty good job. And then, of course, it's 4K HDR. I don't know what the frame rate is of it, but I would imagine, given its cost, it's really a show-off piece for Nvidia for their Tegra chip. It's not. Right. I doubt they sold more than 100,000 of them, but those of us who have them love them.
Yeah. I've had the 2017 version for 3 or 4 years, and
they kept upgrading it.
Has pride to put.
That's the beauty of it. That thing.
Yeah, exactly. And the Shield Pro, which has all that 4K upscaling, and that you talked about, it's only $200.
$200. So it's a little more than an Apple TV. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, if there's one, I really can't point to one thing that I hope that a new Apple TV would have, apart from a reason to exist, because this is one of the saddest parts of the entire product line for Apple. There is no reason for this thing to exist. It's a very, very hard sale for somebody else, for somebody who's not a fan of technology, to say, give Apple close to a couple $100. They will give you what? Well, it will be able to play YouTube videos and play Netflix. Well, I get that free on my TV anyway. Well, you'll be able to play games. Oh, it will be as good as on my phone. Not quite, but it'll be on a big screen. Like, oh, but I bet you have all kinds of exclusive game titles. No, we don't really. Also, the remote control kind of sucks. I mean, you talk about you have the Shield TV Pro, $200, and it is so powerful. You can actually you don't just run Plex on it. You can run a Plex media server on it. This box can record DVR content. It can have like terabytes of your movies and music on it and serve it to any place anywhere in the world. That's the answer to why are you spending $200 for it. In addition to getting access to streaming gaming libraries. At the other hand, you have Roku's Stick, you have Google's Chromecast, all which costs under $50, and they do terrific jobs for it. They do a job that is pretty much just as good as the Apple TV. So that's why I just want to see that Apple has a reason for this to exist, apart from, hey, look, it's got an Apple logo on it. You love the Apple logo, don't you? Give us an extra $100 and you can have your $50 stick with an Apple logo on it. If there's one thing I've always thought that would be a great move for the Apple TV is to kind of, it will always be an HDMI box you plug into a TV, but its role inside the Apple hardware universe is that it is the Apple computer that is always switched on and always connected to the internet 24/7. And you think about all the things that kind of a device could do, including things like a version of Back to My Mac, where it doesn't matter what kind of device you have, if it's an Apple device, it will make a software that's built into both the phone, the tablet, and the Mac will make sure that you could basically AirPlay a screen to wherever you are from wherever you're going to be. That kind of stuff is interesting. The ability to act as a router or as a filter for internet content to control your privacy. That would be a nice thing if that was part of a suite of always-on activities. But as it is, it's the one thing I think in the entire Apple lineup where I have to say there's really no reason to buy it. I would encourage you, instead of buying one of these, buy 3 dongles so that you can have connectivity for all the TVs in your house, even the one in the kitchen.
And I think that for me, I mean, I haven't had anything other than an Apple TV for a while. I mean, I've had everything, and then I just stopped when I moved into this house a couple of years ago. That was the last time I plugged anything else in. So I just
I agree. I tell people, if you want the best, get the Apple TV.
It's here. The thing is that from a privacy perspective, I don't let my TVs actually talk to the internet. I'm like not interested in that process, and so my Apple TV is that interface.
Exactly.
And I think that, and so I trust Apple more than any of the other dongles to only do what it needs to do and constantly be trying to keep my information private. And so I think that, and I think that the other thing is,
it could be better though, right? It could be better.
It's good.
Absolutely. I mean, I hate the controller. I hate the controller, and I hate the, and I literally only need the trackpad at the top. I don't need all the other buttons. I just wish people would stop using them so that I could just use that top piece. I don't need any other buttons. And so so I think that's it. I do think that there's an opportunity for, I mean, part of it is also that gets a little mashed up is that as an Apple user, I want everything connected to my .me account and not have to do all this logging and putting in little codes and doing all the weird stuff.
They've done a good job of that,
work.
and they now tie into your cable. They've done a pretty good job. They tie into your cable company, so there's a lot less password entering than there used to be.
I don't even want my cable. I don't want the cable company thing. I just want. I literally want. I'm an Apple user.
Yeah. Live in the Apple ecosystem. Nowhere else.
Well, like I am not like it, and I'm not quite there, but usually when something is asking me to register to their system and not just use my Apple ID, I just go like, this better be really good or I'm going to quit. I don't even go over that hump anymore. And so, if it's for work, like Tidal is a disaster, like you can't figure out how, the way that they've implemented it is just such a pain, and so, so that's a good example of, I just want that to smooth out and just be something that I can get connected to.
Right.
And so I think that as companies do that, I think it's great. I also think that there's an opportunity for the Apple TV to take that high ground of the next level of technology. And what's interesting is I don't even expect Apple to do that usually. Usually they're behind on everything, but they have, because they're creating content that they're buying, because they're creating the games that they're buying, because they build the hardware, because they build the phones, because they build all this whole ecosystem, their ability to innovate and say, hey, we are going to give you 8K 120 frame per second or 4K 120 frame per second, or they've already started doing the HDR and surround sound. They can push that field down the road much faster than everyone else. Nobody else can do that other than Apple. And it really will, then what happens as an Apple user, you're like, well, I have the best of everything because I have better frame rates and I have higher resolution and I have, all of those things, and that you literally the other groups cannot put together because it requires them to all agree with each other. The content creators and the manufacturers and everything else all have to come to a consortium, and Apple doesn't need to do that. And so I think that we will continue. I don't know whether Apple will do what I just said, but I think you're going to continue to see Apple do things that say, we can do something that no one else can do because we don't have to gather agreement. We can just innovate.
Right.
And I think that's going to be that's their strongest suit when they play it.
Yep.
But it's always going to be about content, not about technological capabilities.
Right,
I don't care about
8K.
I don't care about 8K 120 frames per second if it's like a TV show or a movie that I have no interest in whatsoever. It's always going to be about content and never about the technology.
Absolutely, which is why they have a whole. But I mean, now that they have a whole that's why you can't just do it as if you're not buying that content, you can't. They have to have Apple TV, the Apple TV Plus content be good, but I think that but generating that content through the games and through Apple TV Plus is part of the puzzle, and they have to get that right, but they have to get that right either way. But if you combine that with it's great content that they're with great actors and great directors and everything else. And oh, by the way, it happens to be the best representation, like as good or better than going to the theater. That is something that also attracts the talent. So, you know, if a Martin Scorsese knows, or, you know, or someone else knows that it's going to be like, it's never going to look as good as it looks on Apple TV, you know, that helps drive acceptance of them working with the platform as well. So that's part of it.
I don't think you're necessarily wrong. I just think you're overstating it. I think that it's you still have the bottleneck of how many of your subscribers have TVs that will be able to take advantage of that kind of frame rate and that kind of technology. That's all I'm saying.
The frame rate isn't the challenge.
I think it's limiting. I think you want to put your energy and your money into getting Babylon 5 when you're fighting against Disney, who owns damn everything. And you have to figure out how you're going to get people excited about the content that's on your device or your service.
Well, and I think that the interesting thing though is that you know, at the trajectory we're going, you know, it's going to be, you know, 8K TVs are going to cost what 4K TVs cost right now by next year. You know, and so the resolutions there
have really fallen. I mean,
4Ks are nothing now,
yeah,
and 8Ks.
It's 4K OLED is rapidly becoming a standard. I think more people than you realize, Andy, have high quality TVs now.
Again, the 8K.
But great content. There's no point in having a great picture if it's a crappy show.
Well, but that's the problem for the manufacturers that aren't generating content. Apple has a content machine now that they can say we're going to start shooting. And where I would go is not with the film stuff. What I would be going at is the nature, you know, the small world type stuff would be the first place you'd go.
People like HBO Max who still don't have, almost nothing is in 4K. It's all 1080p.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's both. I think you're both right. It's got to be driven from both directions.
Yeah. See, I think part of this is that I'm wondering how much more. I'm wondering how important 8K is going to be compared to 4K, because HD was a huge leap forward. 4K was not as big of a leap forward, but something you could appreciate. 8K, you're starting to get to the point of.
I agree.
Unless you've got hunting, stalking cats.
Yeah,
exactly. It's not something that in a showroom you can really convince somebody.
Frankly, HDR is more important than
HDR is much. HDR and zone-based lighting, backlighting are much bigger things than 8K at this point.
I mean, all I can say is that once you've seen 8K 120 frame per second HDR, when you combine those three things together, it is like looking out of a window. Like it is just like looking it's like a window in your house that goes out to the outside world. And there is some combination of what those are that like, for instance, if that fills your periphery, you will start feeling any camera motion starts to make your stomach pull in, you know? And that is it just shifts an entirely different gear in your head. Or at least that's been my experience of looking at that kind of footage, is that your brain literally processes it completely differently than it does regular video or film. And so I think that there is this point where that when we go over that hump, there's going to be a group of things that are coming out. And again, I think it makes more sense. I think you actually have to shoot differently, because I have found that at that resolution and frame rate, I get uncomfortable when the edits are too fast.
Yeah.
You know, like it. And so, but the places that's going to make a difference, if they can figure that part out, is sports, nature, you know, like football at 8K on an 85-inch, you know, 8K screen, you know, with surround and everything else at HDR will be a thing. Like people will, you know, it will be as good as, you know, for many people, as good as being there. You know,
but Apple's not going to get an exclusive on that. So they're going to be chasing every single other person who now has an $80 dongle that does 4K, 8K, 120 frames per second.
But the amount of horsepower required to do it is pretty high. It's going to be hard. The thing is that's the advantage of doing it, is because you can't put it into a dongle.